Hey guys, welcome back to We're Talking Movies. This is Cade, joined by Andrew, and today we are going to be reviewing The Strangers from 2008. Andrew, do you want to start off our pros with this movie?
Sure. And let's start off with the biggest one, which is this movie is genuinely scary. And a big part of that is just how realistic it is. There's nothing supernatural or anything just remotely out of the ordinary. It is three psychopaths who decide that they're going to torment and torture these people. And just like how they put it, they did it because they were home and they never reveal who the strangers are. They could be your mailman, your next door neighbor, your kid's dance teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always loved how realistic this movie is and how scary it is because of that. In fact, regarding how this movie is inspired by true events, as it claims, it was said to be inspired by two real-life events. It was inspired by the Manson family murders, and the other actually relates to something that happened to Brian Bertino, the writer and director of this movie. Apparently, there were a series of break-ins in his neighborhood when he was a kid, and one of the people involved actually knocked on his door one night asking for someone who wasn't there. So, yeah, I can kind of see how something like that would stay with him for so long, and maybe why he would want to incorporate that in a movie.
Yeah, no, just the fact that it sounds like a story that could absolutely have happened in the real world is what makes it so damn scary.
Yeah, and another pro for me is going to have to be the atmosphere. One thing I always appreciate about horror movies is when they manage to be scary without throwing in jump scares every couple of minutes. This movie does have its share of jump scares, I'll admit that. Nevertheless, another element of this movie that also makes it unsettling to me is definitely the atmosphere. On one hand, I love how the events for this movie are set in the middle of nowhere, and I really like the main location of this movie, the vacation home. I think the production design on it is really good. I also like how we don't really see much daylight throughout the movie. The cinematography, for the most part, is pretty good. And I really enjoy the sound design. That I think is a crucial element that this movie needed to get right and to keep the audiences on the edge of their seats. And I think they pulled it off really well.
Yeah, I need to definitely echo the sound design because my favorite scene in this movie is when the strangers kind of descend upon the house, where Liv Tyler is kind of just anxiously working her way around the house, trying to just keep herself occupied because she knows something's up. But then you see Baghead in the background, just kind of watching her completely unnoticed for a good couple of minutes, and it's just dead silent. That is genuinely, in my opinion, one of the best horror movie scenes of all time.
Yeah, it's definitely a great scene. And adding on to that, another thing I want to highlight is Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman's performances. I think Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman do a really good job in this movie as Kristen McKay and James White. I don't necessarily think that their characters are that much of a standout, but that's something we'll get into later on. However, I do think that the two of them have decent chemistry in the movie. One thing that I think makes their dynamic more interesting is the fact that they're at a point in their relationship where it's kind of strained. This relates to how he proposes to her at the wedding reception before the events of the film, and she turns him down. I think that they do a great job portraying two people who have hit a roadblock with their relationship. And I also think that they do a great job portraying how terrified Kristen and James are with the situation that they're in.
Yeah, acting across the board, I think, is very good in this movie, which is kind of a rarity in horror movies. Usually, you got a couple of decent performances, but then you got other people who are kind of wooden. This one, you got everybody's doing pretty well. I think Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman do a really good job playing off each other because they clearly care about each other as a couple, but like clearly something is up, and you learn what that thing is over the course of the movie. And that kind of actually does play into some of their actions as when they become victims of the strangers.
Yeah, I especially think that they're really good in that scene where they're tied to the chairs and the strangers are just standing right in front of them and they're finally just embracing each other. I think that's a really effective scene with their performances.
Yeah, I think it kind of highlights the old idea of we're not perfect, but we love each other and we need each other, or in our darkest moments kind of thing.
Yeah, and another pro for me that I definitely want to highlight is just the strangers. I think this movie does such a great job making these three characters feel like such frightening and dangerous individuals. Apart from their masks, which I really like, another thing that I enjoy about the strangers is that we don't really know anything about them. We get brief little glimpses of their faces throughout the movie, specifically Dollface, but that's really it. We don't know their backstories, their real names, what they do outside of hunting their victims. We don't know anything. The closest thing that we get, like you said, to knowing about what their motivation is for terrorizing Kristen and James is when Dollface just simply says to them, because you were home. The reason I think that motive is so effective is because it's all just fun for them. And sometimes it's scarier when there's no deeper motive for the killers.
Yeah, and the ambiguity, the mysteriousness, it really hypes up the scariness of this trio of psychopaths. Because again, who are they? How do they come together? How many times have they done this? How much blood is on their hands? How many people have they killed? And another aspect that I don't think is brought up enough when people are talking about this movie is how intelligent the strangers are as a unit. Like, for instance, I think it's Pinup Girl that rams the stranger's truck into Kristen and James's car so they can't get out that way. Baghead grabs Kristen's phone, throws it in the fireplace, so she can't use that. They cut the phone lines. They spread out and conquer, trap them in between either the house or the weird like barn on the other side of the property. Of course, that does mean they run back and forth between those two things half a dozen times, and we'll get to that in a minute. I think it does a really good job of presenting. Not only are they enjoying what they're doing, they're good at it too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing I really like about The Strangers. All right, well, now that we've talked about our pros, now let's move into our cons. Do you want to start?
Yeah, and let's talk about my biggest con for the movie, and that's just the third act in general. For a movie that had a great first and second act, my God, it falls apart in the final third. Because how many times do Liv and Scott Speedman run back and forth from the house to the barn, back to the house, from the barn to the house? And at this point, it seems like, how do they not see certain strangers standing there? It's just, oh God, it all really falls apart at the end. It picks up in like the last 5 minutes when the strangers, have Kristen and James tied up to the chairs and they reveal themselves and they kill James. Spoiler alert for a movie that came out 16 years ago now. There's a lot of running back and forth and it gets really old.
Yeah, I mean, because the first act of the movie is a little slow because it introduces us to James and Kristen as protagonists, which is fine. But then the second act really picks up when the strangers start terrorizing them and we see them fighting back and just struggling to survive. And yeah, when you get to the third act, when James gets taken by the strangers and Kristen's just trying to use the radio to call for help and then just rushes back to the house and then hides. Yeah, the pacing for the movie just really kind of drags down at that point, which is unfortunate. And does that mean it's automatically a bad movie? Absolutely not. But it definitely loses the thrill and suspense that the second act maintained really well.
Yeah, and there's a difference between slow burn and dragging. The first third of this movie, the opening act, that's a slow burn. This drags because this doesn't have the tension of the build up now that we know what the strangers are all here to do.
Yeah, and another big con that I want to bring up with this movie would have to be the characters. While I do enjoy Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman's performances, Kristen and James as characters aren't really all that memorable to me, aside from their relationship being in this really awkward place because she turned down his proposal. We don't really know that much about Kristen and James as characters outside of that. They don't really have that much personality or character as some of the better protagonists in horror films. And because of that, it's always kind of difficult for me to get as invested in their characters every time I rewatch this movie.
Yeah, again, it's good performances, but it's not that deep of characters.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because another big issue that I have with this movie would have to be some of the dumb decisions that are made throughout the movie. I'm fully aware that characters tend to make dumb decisions in horror movies. I totally understand. And if that happens a couple of times, I'm willing to accept it, but there comes a point where it just starts to get irritating, and I won't go through everything, but here are some examples of what I mean. After Dollface knocks on the door and says that she'll see them later, James then drives off to buy Kristen cigarettes. This is just me, but I don't think it's a good idea to just drive into town drunk and leave her there at that house in the middle of nowhere when there's a stranger just walking around the area.
Yeah, that's not exactly peak decision making now, is it?
And another scene that really bugs me is after James runs off to go find the radio, Kristen just sits outside the house where the strangers can easily spot her, and she just sits there waiting for him. Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm being harassed by murderous psychopaths. Let me have a seat just in the open where everybody can see me. Oh God, yeah, no, there is some very dumb decision making in this movie, and that is one of the things that drags it down from, in my opinion, being an all-time horror classic.
Yeah, and another character that has always been a con for me is the character of Mike. The issue that I have with this character is that he feels completely unnecessary. I mean, we see him come out to the house to pick up James, but then when we see him exploring the house, he just gets killed almost instantly after he's introduced to us. Because of that, his character just feels totally unneeded. And also, just when it comes to dumb decisions, he's another character that I think fits this because When he arrives at the house, we see him calling out to see if Kristen and James are still there. But then when he's inside the house and you can clearly tell that there's been some kind of break-in, he just stays completely silent the whole time until he gets to the point where James just shoots him. It's just always kind of bugged me.
Yeah, again, not great decision making across the board in this movie. I'm willing to give Mike some slack though, just because yes, the decisions that lead to his death are painfully idiotic, but just that sheer emotional gut punch of his death and just how it just absolutely ruins the already very, very frayed nerves of Kristen and James kind of makes up for it, in my opinion. So for me, that's not as big of a con as it is for you.
Okay, I understand. I guess maybe if I had one more con, maybe just a little one, I've actually never really been a big fan of the ending. Now, I don't mean how the strangers end up getting away at the end. Now, that I like. What I mean is when the two boys find the house and Kristen just wakes up screaming. One reason I'm not really a fan of that ending is because I honestly think that it would have made for a much better and scarier ending if both Kristen and James didn't survive the movie. Also, to me, it just kind of comes off as something that was kind of added just to have one final scare for the closing of the movie, just for the sake of having it.
Yeah, it does have that kind of tacked on feel, does it?
Yeah, again, it's never been a big con for me. It's just something that's always been kind of annoying. But to move on to our score, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this movie?
Well, like I said a few times, it's good. It's not an all-time great. Again, it really does lose itself in the third act and then picks it itself up right in like the last 5 minutes. This is kind of a tough one because again, there is stuff I really do like about this movie. If I had to choose one, I'm gonna say 6.75. I don't know if we've ever gone into the quarter rankings before, but that really is what it feels like. Because again, there is such stuff I like in this movie, but there's also stuff I just can't stand. And if a few of those, just a few of those things I can't stand weren't in this, it would bump it up to easily a 7.5, maybe even an 8.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, it's a movie that I've always had things with it that I like and things that I don't like. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. That would probably be my score. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.